welcome to the American Sports Connection. I am your host, the one and only Joey Railroads. I am back from my hiatus for a little R&R I was on just to kind of recharge my batteries. Unfortunately, I cannot throw it over to anybody tonight, so you're stuck with just me, myself, and I for the next little while. I figured we would switch it up here and call this show This Week in Wrestling as opposed to just WWE related things, which is still a big part of what we do, but there's obviously more things going on in the world of wrestling than just WWE and the be-all, end-all. For example, I'll tell you this past week, I have been to 2 independent shows. One I normally go to every week called CZW Dojo Wars on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock in Blackwood, New Jersey at the CZW Dojo Training Academy. And if you want to check out any of their stuff, you can go on their YouTube page or channel, whatever you want to call it, at type in Dojo Wars and it should pop up because they record every show that they do, and it has like a homier feeling because it's a smaller venue. There you could fit maybe 50 people at the very, very most in there, because it's basically just their training gym with chairs thrown around the ring. I had a lot of fun at that. Then last night, I went to see a free show in Woodbury, New Jersey at the East Coast Wrestling Alliance. And I normally don't like to bash or knock people or their promotions, but let's just say I'm glad it's free, and it was free, and we'll leave it at that. My son had a good time, but for the most part, I had more fun seeing people that I'm familiar with, like it was the old ECW with the hat guy and those types of things. I do have some other independent news that most of you wouldn't know about. Kurt Robinson, The Hook, who I've had on this show previously, he was kind enough to do an interview with us, is no longer affiliated with Combat Zone Wrestling, and at this time is accepting bookings basically everywhere as far as I know. So if you want to book him, find him on Twitter at Kurt Robinson Pro, and hopefully he can get on your show, because the kid is only 16 years old, supremely talented. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up on the big show at some point in his career. Very, very immensely talented kid. Alright, I'm going to go and talk about the fun stuff first, which I consider to be the CWC from Wednesday and NXT from Wednesday. I'll run it down. This week was a great episode of CWC. As always, I don't think I've seen a bad one yet. They opened the show with Rich Swann versus Lince Dorado. I'm a big Rich Swann fan before he even started in the CWC, so I was always kind of biased to him anyway. But Lince Dorado has shown me a lot too, because I'm not really familiar with him before this tournament. And that is what I loved about the CWC, is guys that you've never seen before or never even heard of before were allowed to kind of go balls to the wall and make a name for themselves, where even if the WWE doesn't sign them, they've at least been on their programming and can use it as a reference for more workout on the independents. So, long story short, Rich Swann eventually beats Lince Dorado with a huge Phoenix splash, which was very impressive, by the way, to move on in the Cruiserweight Classic. The second match we had was Zack Sabre Jr., who I consider to be one of the heavy favorites in this, versus one of the Gulak brothers, Drew Gulak. Again, another awesome, hard-hitting, technical match. Really like Drew Gulak. I saw him and his brother wrestle at Hybrid Pro Wrestling in Eddystone, Pennsylvania. Very fun to watch live. Saw Zack Sabre Jr. there as well. Super talented and a very cool guy to speak to. Very fan friendly, very kid friendly, which is always nice in these day and age. But they had another really good match with Gulak playing up being a heel and trying to go for submissions on and off through this match, but eventually leads to Gulak putting on his dreaded Dragon Sleeper, but Zack Sabre Jr. counters out into a bridge for the 3 count. So Zack Sabre Jr. is moving on in the CWC. Shame for Drew Gulak because I really like him. If you're not familiar, I don't know if he's been signed. If you don't want to know this, don't listen to what I'm about to say. At the recent NXT tapings, Drew Gulak is worked them and is going to be in a match on them in the next 3 weeks that'll air on NXT. So I don't know if that means he's signed a developmental deal with them or not. After that, the final match of the night, we had TJ Perkins and Johnny Gargano. Another one that really, really delivered. No real heel babyface in this one. It was just kind of 2 guys that respected each other doing their thing. A lot of fun moves. Gargano did a nice dive outside the ring, which was really cool to see. I was actually really surprised by this and the ending because TJ Perkins eventually beats Gargano with a knee bar and advances to the Elite 8 of the CWC. Maybe it's because Gargano's officially signed his NXT deal now. They let Perkins win. I'm not really sure. But that was really interesting to me how that all came about. So Perkins moves on, and it was cool at the end that they both shake hands to kind of end the show, which was always fun to see, at least from a purist standpoint like myself. All right, moving right along, we're going to talk about NXT because I'm a huge NXT fan, but I have to kind of gripe about this just for a little bit because the reason I liked NXT and do like NXT is they stand out from the main roster where it's not so heavily produced, a lot of long talking segments or long hype videos or whatever you want to call them. You know, like they have at the pay-per-views that basically put people to sleep, where it's like, yes, we're going to show it on the 2-hour pre-show, the hype video for the main event or whichever high-profile match, and then we're going to show it again on the main card and just make people fall asleep. That drives me insane. But NXT this week decided they wanted to do that and go more what happened at TakeOver, which I understand. You have to kind of like show different things that happened and all this. Kind of like, not a results show, but like the main stuff that kind of happened, let people know, I guess, if they didn't see the show. But I'm just really annoyed that there's only 2 matches on this week's episode of NXT, because that's what I really like, is they really kind of jam-pack matches in 1 hour. It really reminds me a lot of the old ECW Hardcore TV, because where I live, we used to get that from when it first started back in the early 90s. So, anyway, the first match they have on NXT this week was Tye Dillinger versus Wesley Blake. Happy to see Tye Dillinger back. Big fan of his work. He is super over with the crowd. And I don't get... It's almost felt like they've tried to kill him to the crowd, because before he was off television for a while, he had wrestled Nakamura and Cien Almas. And I don't know if it's because he's such a good hand in the ring, they wanted it to do that, because he would make them look good without caring about his actual push or lack thereof, because he's one of the most over superstars on NXT. So he's been off television for a while after he lost to the wrestler formerly known as Biff Busick from CZW. I don't remember his NXT name. It's some god-awful name. But Tye comes back on television after a hiatus against Wesley Blake and eventually beats him with the tiebreaker, which is cool to see. Hopefully he could kind of get on a little winning streak here and maybe get a little love from the back. That would be nice. The main event for NXT this past week was TM61 from the Australian boys versus the Authors of Pain with Paul Ellering. These guys, the Authors of Pain, are really kind of like learning on the fly, because the match was really not that good. And they came out with covered skull masks to kind of like make them look scarier. Not that they already weren't. But it's and they finally gave them names. Their names are Rezer, Rezer, and Akam, Akam. The issue I had with this is, I know you're trying to get these guys over, the Authors of Pain, and you guys really believe in them, like to hype them up if you're putting Paul Ellering with them. But it's like, throw TM61 a little love too. I mean, they got a 2 count on them, and that was about as close as they got. I mean, you bring these guys over from Australia, formerly known as TDMK. Really big over there, and they haven't really won a big match or like a career-defining win, I guess you would call it, in WWE. Because I'm a big fan of TM61. They wrestle old school tag team style. So we'll have to see where it goes. Eventually, the Authors of Pain win this match with their double team finisher. The problem is they could be something. The Authors of Pain. I understand what they see in them, but in my personal opinion, it's not going to be anytime soon. They really need a lot of work. That's my honest opinion. And that's basically it for NXT this week. Now, we'll have to get in to Raw, excuse me, and SmackDown. The big story on Raw this week that everyone knows, unless you've been living under a rock, is Finn Balor was injured at SummerSlam and tore his labrum in his shoulder and had to relinquish the belt, the Universal Championship, in the opening segment of Raw. Before we get to what went on after Finn relinquished the title, I want to touch on something really quick. I initially said Seth Rollins, I've given the guy the benefit of the doubt. The thing with Sting, with the buckle bomb twice, and him getting hurt. Sting had come out and said that Seth didn't hurt him, it was his fault. The breaking of John Cena's nose, that was a freak kind of injury thing. Now Finn Balor gets hurt. I was starting to question initially if Seth Rollins was unsafe in the ring. I'm starting to sound like Bret Hart here. However, I went back and I rewatched the match and rewatched the spot with the buckle bomb outside. Seth Rollins did not do it wrong. Finn Balor took the bump wrong outside. He landed high up on his shoulder when he should have braced himself and kind of tucked his head and, kind of crumbled up to where the back of his spine and shoulders would have taken more of it than just his shoulder. So, for Bret Hart to be salty like he always is about Seth Rollins saying he's going to kill somebody in the ring, it's not true. He's not being unsafe. Yeah, exactly, Lance. He kind of twisted himself. He landed kind of wonky, as I call it, where he didn't tuck his head and kind of let his back take more of the blow. Eventually, after Balor gives up the Universal Championship, we have Seth Rollins come out, then Sami Zayn, then Chris Jericho, then Kevin Owens, followed by Enzo, and to finish it off, Roman Reigns, which set off a series of matches for the evening that whoever won these matches would be put into a fatal four-way for the Universal Championship on Raw this Monday from Houston, Texas. The first match that started it out was Sami Zayn versus Seth Rollins. I have to tell you, I watched this match. I don't know if he got you, Lance. I legitimately thought Sami Zayn hurt himself and hurt his ankle. Apparently, that was not the case. It was all a work. So, hell of a work by Sami Zayn, because he really had me believing he hurt his ankle. But I enjoyed this match. Zayn and Rollins have really good chemistry together in the ring. It's just... Oh, is it Lance? Okay. The injury thing, that's his shtick? Okay. It's weird, though, to me, because Sami Zayn got a, I guess you would say, career-defining win in WWE last month against Kevin Owens. And after that, he's done basically nothing. Where he was on a pre-show match for SummerSlam with Neville. And then he's basically jobbed out to Seth Rollins twice since then, I believe. If my memory serves me correct. So, I don't know what they're doing with Sami Zayn. If they're trying to do like the Daniel Bryan type thing. Where it's like, oh, the underdog, he loses, but then he'll eventually get his moment. Or, I guess that's where they're going with that. I really don't know. But anyway, Seth Rollins eventually wins to advance to the Fatal 4-Way on Monday night. This coming Monday. Back to the taxi for him, yeah. I know exactly how you feel. I kind of feel the same way, Lance, where his in-ring work is amazing. He's really talented in the ring. His gimmick just is like, you know what I mean? It just doesn't do anything for me. And I'm not knocking the guy. Maybe they need to put the mask back on him and turn him into El Generico. He had more charisma there. Next after that, we had another qualifier, which was Kevin Owens versus Neville. These guys put on a really good match. It was fun to see Jericho come out, kind of interfere to eventually help Owens win. And he didn't use the pop-up powerbomb. He used that torture rack kind of move that he does now, which is kind of really cool looking. And the other thing that I don't know if this was because it was a heel thing or they were trying to get like Neville to look good. Neville had like 90% of the offense in this match. I don't know if that was like on purpose or what it was, but I was kind of scratching my head at that one. But eventually Kevin Owens wins with, like I said, the cool torture rack kind of slam move to move on to the Fatal 4-Way next week. I have to talk about this just because it was so bad on Raw. It was like cringeworthy. And I'm sure you guys remember this, was the Titus O'Neil promo. I really like Titus. Adam that comes on here, my good friend, he loves Titus. Thinks he's deserves a big push. Well, they tried to give him his chance on Raw to cut a promo, make it interesting. He failed miserably. It was painful to listen to and to watch. And it eventually leads to Bob Backlund, of all people, but I mark out for Bob Backlund, coming out and putting him in the chicken wing briefly. And then Titus just beating the snot out of him, which makes me kind of think he's a heel, I'm assuming. But either way, I didn't really want to go too in-depth about this, but it was just so bad, that segment, I had to bring it up. Where I was just like, what in God's name is this? I mean, they better start bringing their A game for Raw because Monday Night Football is 2 weeks away, September 12th. So, WWE writers, if you're listening, you better get cooking, man. Next, we had Rusev versus Big Cass. This match was okay. Not a huge fan of Rusev or Cass. I mean, Cass isn't bad, but he's really not ready, I believe, for the singles push yet. They're just kind of, I think, throwing him in there because Vince loves him, because he, kind of gets excited when he sees big guys that are over 6'6". But they had a decent match. I like Rusev as a heel, and his in-ring work is not too terrible. He's a good mid-card guy, where he's at U.S. title, IC title, those types, that area. Cass eventually wins by countout to advance to the Fatal 4-Way on Monday. Eventually on Raw, we had Bayley make her debut because of the blowback of Sasha Banks being potentially badly hurt, which turned out not to be true. She has lower back issues, but they're not as bad as they had originally first thought. However, Charlotte really didn't have anyone to feud with, so Bayley was basically thrown on Raw when she probably was going to end up on SmackDown in a few weeks. Which was interesting in itself, and she got a pretty good pop for coming out. I like Bayley. I think she's really talented in the ring. I really think she could probably be, if they do it right, the female version of John Cena. That's how much she is loved by kids. And mostly adults too. I mean, but more so kids. Because they have her number one fan, Izzy, that was always in the front row at NXT. So she could really be a merch, machine if they do it right. So that should be fun to watch. The Dudley Boys had their retirement, quote unquote, promo from WWE, because they never used the word retirement. They just said we're leaving. Because, heaven forbids we say retirement, because we usually always go back on our word. I thought it was cool that they let them kind of have their thing. And then I was annoyed because they let Anderson and Gallows beat them up and put them through a table. I'm assuming it's because if they want to come back at some point, they have a ready-made feud for them with Gallows and Anderson. But it's just like, come on, kind of let them go out on their own terms without having to have their ass kicked by like the Shining Stars and Anderson and Gallows, for God's sakes. I really was expecting a double cross. I was expecting Bubba to turn on Devon and turn into Bully Ray from TNA, which I thought would have been really exciting because I was a big Bully Ray fan. I thought at one point he was the best heel in professional wrestling for a while. So that was kind of disappointing. From all that I have read, they had originally signed... Well, not signed new deals. They had agreed to new deals, and then they changed their minds and said, nah, we're just going to go home. Because apparently Devon wants to be home and kind of like train guys at their school, which is cool because they've done it all. I just wish they would have let them have one more title run, even if it was for a month. Just so they had become the 10-time tag team champions. Because to me, the Dudley Boys are the greatest heel tag team I have ever seen. You want to talk about a team that could get heat and make people hate you and get angry. Them in ECW, no one could ever touch them. They incited riots in the ECW arena and many other places they went to. One other thing I want to touch on Raw. Yeah, exactly, Lance. Even if it's a one-night title reign, win it at the pay-per-view, lose on Raw. Just let them have it where they're the 10-time champions. That would have been awesome. The main event for Raw was Jericho versus Reigns. Alright match. They were trying to do the same thing where Kevin Owens helps his buddy Jericho beat Reigns, which eventually didn't work and backfired, where Reigns wins and goes into the Fatal 4-Way on Raw this week. I don't know if they're going to play up maybe where Jericho helps Owens win the Universal title on Raw this coming week. That would be kind of cool, because I read original plans were for Finn Balor to fight Kevin Owens for the Universal title at the next pay-per-view in September, and then they were going to have a triple threat with Finn Balor, Chris Jericho, and Kevin Owens at Hell in a Cell. So, in my personal opinion, I would love to see Kevin Owens get a little run with it. Why not? I mean, my personal fear is Vince is going to panic that Balor is gone, and he's going to put the strap right back on Reigns, which we all don't want to see. I know that for a fact. So that was Raw. Moving on, we'll go to SmackDown, which I believe was the better show this week. They started off the show with Shane and Daniel Bryan showing the new titles that were going to be crowned at Backlash. They were going to have a 6-woman scramble, I think it was called, with basically every SmackDown women's wrestler in it, and whoever gets the first pinfall becomes the first ever SmackDown Women's Champion. And they're having a tournament for the tag titles that will commence at Backlash as well to crown the first ever SmackDown World Tag Team Champions, or whatever the hell they're going to call them. I don't know if they gave them a name. The Ascension wrestled the Usos in the first match of the tournament. Quick one, not really noteworthy, and the Usos win over the Ascension. Here was something interesting, I thought. Carmella was supposed to wrestle Nikki Bella, and eventually did a heel turn on Nikki and basically beat the snot out of her in the ring. And I was really surprised by this, but in a good way, because I don't think Carmella was getting over as a face, so why not have her just beat the crap out of the girl that just came back with a bad neck and like kick her in the neck 50 times? So why not? It seemed like it worked to me. She beat her up on SmackDown, and then she beat her up on Smack Talk, which is the show they have after SmackDown goes off on the network. So she beats her up twice and has to be pulled off. So I'm assuming that's going to eventually lead to some type of feud other than the 6-pack challenge. The other match they had in the tag tournament was American Alpha versus Breezango. I really enjoyed this match. Breezango really showed that they can really work good. They had a really good match with the Usos on a pre-show last month and showed me something, and then they went almost move for move with American Alpha in this match, which was fun to watch, entertaining, and eventually American Alpha wins with their finisher Grand Altitude or however the hell you say it. So they move on. One other thing I wanted to point out, Bray Wyatt came out when Randy Orton was talking about what happened to him at SummerSlam with Brock Lesnar, saying he's basically going to beat him up, which is kind of leading into their feud, I'm assuming, for Backlash. And he's finally on his own. No Rowan, no Strowman. I'm happy about that. He needs to sink or swim by himself without all these other guys. I actually, when I watched him this week, they tried to, I think, make him be like The Undertaker a little bit, where Orton calls him like they're going to fight, like, come on, and Bray takes his jacket off or sweatshirt or whatever you want to call it, and the lights go out and they do the little fluky thing like what they always do when someone's going to show up, and he just disappears. So I instantly thought of Undertaker when they did that, because that was something Undertaker would kind of do. After that, the one other thing I want to touch on was the main event of the evening, which was Dolph Ziggler versus AJ Styles. If Ziggler won, he was going to be put in the main event of Backlash, which I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show was AJ Styles versus Dean Ambrose for the World Heavyweight Championship. Oh, he did, Lance? I didn't see that. I didn't see he went under the apron. That's funny. But either way, we had Dolph Ziggler, AJ Styles as the main event. Very entertaining match. Obviously, you're not going to get a bad match with these guys. But it eventually leads to AJ Styles winning, because we all know Dolph Ziggler was not going to win a big match twice. And they basically ended the show with AJ Styles and Dean Ambrose having a stare down. I'm really kind of thinking that Styles is going to get the belt at Backlash, because he beat Cena. Cena gave him the huge push, and now Styles is saying he is the face that runs the place, not John Cena anymore. And so that was kind of cool. Yeah, I think AJ needs it, because it kind of like just defines his career. You know what I mean? And Vince is really high on him now. He said, or at least reports are, that he said in interviews that he wishes he had AJ Styles 10 years ago, which he technically could have, but AJ just didn't want to move his family from where they were to OVW at the time, because I don't know if a lot of people know that they had offered him a deal to go to developmental and basically, you know, like hone his craft and eventually come up to the main roster, but he turned it down. And this was probably a decade ago, if not more. I would love to see him have a good run with the title. That would be really fun, I think, because I'm a huge AJ Styles fan. So that is Raw, SmackDown, NXT, CWC, and all the other wrestling stuff that has gone on this week. I have some other news for you guys before I get out of here. I am working on finalizing 2 more interviews of local guys that'll come on and we'll talk about their careers and all that stuff. They've both agreed to do it. I'm just waiting for confirmation, like on dates when they're available to come on and talk with their busy schedules and all that stuff. I actually saw the one guy wrestle last night. You guys can look him up. He wrestles for WrestlePro. He came down here last night. His name is Craven, Craven, Varro, Varro. Really good dude. Unfortunately, he got busted open the hard way last night by hitting the ring post and had to get the wound glued shut. So I'm sure that was fun instead of having to spend the night in the hospital. The other person I'm working on, he's supposed to be getting back to me at some point, is the Creative Pro World Heavyweight Champion, the tweener himself, Max Caster, who is another really good dude. It's just I have to work with him with his schedule. He's supposed to get back to me at some point in the future. And the funny thing is, I had jokingly tweeted him about he needed to be booked more down here. And he replied to my tweet agreeing with me and said, by the way, I would love to come on your show anytime. So that was a really cool thing because he's a really good guy. So I wanted to pass along that information that you'll be getting some more interviews in the very near future. I'm going to get out of here for tonight. I will be back tomorrow with Lance. We will be doing our WWE Rewind series at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good shit. And I will see you guys tomorrow night. Have a great night, everybody.